Hey, what's up everyone? Raging Golden Eagle here, having way too much fun as always. And a couple of days back I did a video talking about this whole Me Too copycat mentality in the modern game industry is just flat out destroying everyone who tries to partake in it. Then I noticed this comment was left on that video, and I'm gonna have it all up on the screen right now before we go back to the gameplay. No, I didn't censor the name or anything else because I'm not gonna be roasting the comment or doing a response to it or nothing. Just kind of gonna use it as a springboard to elaborate a little bit further on some of the ideas I was going into in that previous video. So this guy was basically pointing out that the same stuff happens in other markets too. Take literature particularly aimed at teens. You had Hunger Games and then some clones, including movies once it took off. Same with the vampire and werewolf genre, tons of stuff on the teen shelves. And while this is definitely true, I believe it actually makes sense when it comes to books. How long does it take the average person to finish a book? I'm going to be a bit conservative and say it takes a few days, assuming you're also working and doing other stuff. So you got the latest book of the series you've been following in, you spend a few hours a night reading it, you finish it in a few days. Then what do? If reading happens to be your hobby, you're not just gonna wait until the next year or a few months or whenever the next book in that series comes out. You're gonna look for something else to read. And if you really love a particular genre, you're gonna look for something similar to what you just read. And this is even more obvious when it comes to something like manga. Even when I'm taking my time, it still usually takes me about an hour tops to finish a volume of manga. If I want to read more, I'm not just going to wait a few months or years in the case of Berserk for the next volume of that particular series to come out. I'm going to look for other similar ones. Yeah, I try some new stuff here and there, but you know how it goes. Sometimes you get stuck on one particular genre or another. So in other markets where you quickly consume the product you bought and then you have time for more, like as we just mentioned, books, manga, and this also applies to movies, a little bit of Me Too copycatting somewhat makes sense. As long as whatever it is just inspired by the other stuff, not just a blatant rip-off cheap clone. Those very rarely do all that well. And this actually brings me to the main point of what I want us to talk about. This, in my opinion, is actually one of the main issues I have with all of the non-gamer MBAs being hired to run all these game publishers nowadays. The game industry is definitely not by gamers for gamers anymore. Now it's just like any other cash cow business. And these non-gamer MBAs with generic business knowledge don't seem to understand that what applies to something like books doesn't necessarily work with video games. It does for a small subset of them, maybe. But not the big moneymakers nowadays. These people still apparently view games as just a product you buy and quickly use and then move on to the next, like books and movies. And if you look at something like Madden, they even have planned obsolescence built into the model too, funny enough. I'm willing to bet that Madden could do with only one new game every 5 or 6 years. Everything else could just be a patch. But why would they do that when they could get more money out of you buying $60 for a new game every year, huh? So that's one of the things they tried to do to sell more units to you. And it's worked, I'm not gonna lie. But even then, those are kind of the exception if you look at the huge money makers out there. Things like MMOs and MOBAs. Those types of games eat up a lot of time and take a lot of dedication. If you're playing at anything even remotely above a filthy casual level, they're gonna eat up quite a bit of your time. And you're not gonna have the time for more than one or possibly two of them if you're unemployed. And considering the investment that goes into those games, like not just time but money as well, most people are not going to leave the one they're currently on to move on to your copycat one. You can kind of see this in World of Warcraft where you got people that have been playing the game for over a decade. As you can see, this is a completely different environment when you're talking about something like books. Even if someone is as into a book as some of these players are into their MMOs, they're going to have plenty of time to read plenty of other books while they're waiting for their favorite series to come out with its next volume. So in that type of environment, it's actually worth it to look at what the current trends are and what people actually want to read and give them more of that. Yeah, sure, unless you're completely exceptional, you're not going to do nearly as good as the top dogs, but you could actually reasonably ride their coattails and make a living. Writing a book takes considerably less effort than making a AAA video game. It can be done by one person, and this one person can even delay as much as he wants, or as long as the publisher allows, and doesn't have to worry about things like the graphics being outdated if they delay too long or none of that. So given the investment you'd have to put into it, it's entirely reasonable to make a living off of what you get out of it. Unlike with all these Me Too video games. Let's look at the Overwatch clones again, for example. If you want to even stand a chance at competing with Overwatch, you're already dumping tens of millions of dollars into developing that. So at that point, you already are in the same trap that Square Enix was in with Tomb Raider. If you sell a mere 4 million copies, you're gonna lose. For reference, just recently the Senran Kagura series actually broke 1 million total sales for all of their games combined. And yet Marvelous is still around churning out those games on pretty much a yearly basis. They don't need 10 million plus sales for each game in addition to ongoing microtransactions to turn a profit, because they know what they're doing. They're not trying to take on Dynasty Warriors. All they did was lifted some of the basic gameplay from that series and slapped their own unique identity on top of it, to the point that the audience isn't even remotely the same. So yeah, in closing, this is something that I really wish these NBA executives would finally learn. Unlike just about every other type of media in existence out there, most games are meant to take a lot of time. Your average game takes up a lot more time than your average book or your average movie. And when it comes to multiplayer-focused games, they could take up all of your time. So the people that are playing them and invested in them don't have time for your copycats. That's a market you're never gonna get. So instead of driving your companies into the ground by trying to copy something that works in other industries, you guys really need to learn what works in your own first. That's all I gotta say, guys. Thanks for listening.